Welcome to this breakout session. So this is Breakout 2, Visions for Future Research Environments. So this is a BoF. I'm Andrew Treloar from the Australian Research Data Commons, and my co-host is Andreas Rauber from Technical University Vienna, TU Wien. Welcome to this session. What we'd like to do is start off by just getting a sense of who you are and what you're hoping for from this session. I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about why we're running this session at all. And then I'm going to pass to Andy, who is going to give you a bit of background on the meetings that have led up to this session, and also talk about a project that he's running through the European Open Science Cloud, which I'll let him talk more about, but which is directly relevant to the topic. We'll then have about half of our time focused on open discussion around the next steps. We may end up using breakout rooms for that. Let's see what the size of the group is at that point and what topics people want to discuss. And then we'll end with the obligatory wrap up and thank you. There are collaborative notes for this meeting. So you can either get to the collaborative notes from the session information on StreamPoint. I've created a tiny URL which jumps you straight to the collaborative notes. So if you would like to move to the collaborative notes, you can use that to take notes along with your fellow attendees. Some of you may not be familiar with the term virtual research environment. These get called different things in different places. So VREs are virtual research environments. This term tends to get used a bit more in the UK and Europe. In Australia, where I'm from, we tend to call them virtual laboratories. In the United States, they tend to call them science gateways. They're all, to a first approximation, the same kinds of things. They're ways of getting access to tools and data, and usually compute resources to let you do your research. So what I'd like to start off with is some basic demographics. So we're going to use Mentimeter for this. And if you click on that, sorry, if you don't click on that link, you can't click on it. If you go to that link, or alternative, if you go to menti.com and use code 291260, I just want to spend 3 or 4 minutes getting a sense of who you are, where you're from, and what you're hoping for from this meeting. So I will stop sharing this and share the Mentimeter screen.
Can you? Yes, thank you. Just
yeah.
Put it in the chat.
Put the Mentimeter link in the chat.
Yeah.
I'd have to go back to the slides. Okay, so okay, so I'll put the Mentimeter link in chat now. Thank you for the suggestion, Sandra. I should have done that before. Oh, and Villa's beaten me to it. Thank you, Villa. Kitos. Okay, so hopefully people can see the first question. What RDA region are you from?
Sorry, Andrew, is the first question, what region are you from? Or is it the first question, what are you looking for from the session?
Yeah, that's what I got.
Yeah, well,
three
okay,
words,
so,
what are you looking for? Yeah.
Yeah, that is really not what I wanted. Okay, are you now getting what RDA region are you from? Yes, someone at least got it.
Should we refresh? Oh,
yeah,
okay.
that's looking a little bit better.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so let me share the results so you can see what's coming in.
So you want our location where we are or where we are from?
it's the RDA region that you think.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's a little bit strange. I agree.
Oh, I'm fine. I only with my accent, everyone knows where I'm from, but yeah.
Okay, so you should be able to see the results in Zoom. So reasonably evenly split between the Americas and Europe, and a better showing from Asia, Oceania than I expected. So that's good. Okay, so the next question. If we could get a sense of what your employment setting is. And I recognize that this might be a little bit tricky. And some of you might regard yourselves as both research infrastructure providers and academia, in which case I think I said you could tick both in this one. Okay, all right, so that's interesting. That's more of an even split than I expected. Oh, hey, Karen.
Hi.
Okay, oh, that's going to be really interesting, because that's going to give us perspective both from people who are providing infrastructure and people who are using infrastructure. And of course, some of you may be both. Okay. So if that's where you work, what's your current exposure to VREs, virtual laboratories, science gateways? Again, you should be able to pick multiple options here. I would probably put, there's a number that I would pick there for myself.
I could only pick one.
Yeah.
I could.
Oh, okay. I meant to have it as multiples. My apologies. In that case, you're going to have to pick the one that is the primary interaction for you then.
Yeah,
okay.
It's always cool. Oh, Mentimeter is so cool. Watching it like.
It would be even cooler if the person who'd set it up had set it up the way he'd hoped to, but never mind. Okay, so that's roughly an even split, so that's helpful. And now, 3 words. What are you looking for from this session? And you should be able to put as many sets of 3 words in as possible. Okay, for those people who put collaboration, can you maybe augment that with another one? Collaboration, no, maybe that's not a fair question. All right, we can leave it as collaboration. Okay. Okay, so it looks like collaboration, inspiration, and directions are the ones that are knowledge, maybe, are the ones that seem to be winning out. And in fact, if you look at some of the other words there, they're kinds of variations on some of those. Enlightenment, wow, I don't know if we can deliver enlightenment, but that seems like a big ask, particularly for Andy where it's early in the morning, but we'll see what we can do. Yeah, okay. All right, so that was very helpful. Thank you. Okay, let me stop that and go back to sharing my slides. Okay, hopefully you're seeing the non-presenter view. Yeah, people are, okay, cool.
It looks good.
And it's the wrong presentation, which is not what I wanted. That's the one I wanted. So I should say that if you're interested in this session, I strongly encourage you to go to Breakout 4, where the interest group on virtual research environments is doing a session on good practices for communicating and collaborating within distributed communities and initiatives. Sandra Gesing, who's on this call, is one of the co-chairs of that group. And as I say, if you're interested in the topic, I strongly encourage you to go to that. Those of you that are wondering why have we got a BoF session and an interest group session, the answer is that the BoF session is us thinking through possible future work plans, and we're doing this in close coordination with the interest group. Okay, so before we get into some of the work that Andy's been doing, I just wanted to give you a framework for thinking about the problem. A number of you will have seen this graph before. So this is diffusion of innovation. It's where the phrase early adopters comes from. It's work that is now nearly 60 years old and yet has been hugely influential. And it's essentially a bell curve showing that you start off with the innovators and eventually the laggards get on board. The laggards in this context, perhaps in a COVID year, you might think about as the grandmothers and grandfathers, sorry, let me do it the other way around, the grandfathers and grandmothers who are having to learn how to use Zoom to talk to their grandchildren, the people that kind of adopt technology late. And the result of that is you get this standard S curve. So slow market share at the beginning, rapid exponential growth, and then a kind of taper off towards the end. So that's a generic way of thinking about innovation. And one of the things that that doesn't tell you is how long this takes. So the innovation curve just says over time, this is what you see. The tricky question is, well, great, so how long is that? So this is, if you've not watched the video for this, I strongly encourage you to go to it. It's called The Mother of All Demos. It took place in 1968 by a guy called Doug Engelbart. And using the technology of the time, which was in these days, the thing he's holding in his right hand, by the way, is a mouse carved out of a block of wood. It's an amazing thing, but this demonstrated Windows hypertext graphics, video conferencing, first use of the mouse, word processing, dynamic file linking, revision control, and real-time editing. It's a 90-minute video, and it's astonishing to see what was doable in 1968 if you had access to the right technology and the right skills to make it all work. A lot of those things took a long time to get in front of normal, in quotes, people. So to give you some sense of how long these things take, you could imagine tech precursors to the web in the 1980s, early adoption of the web with arguably Netscape Navigator in 93, or Mozilla, wider adoption in the 2000s, and by now, 2010s, 2020s, it's kind of ubiquitous. The web is just everywhere, so everywhere that most people think of the web as the internet. In fact, I've almost given up trying to correct people on that one. Video conferencing, tech precursors in the 90s, early adoption in the 2000s. So I remember using early broad-based video conferencing systems, internet-based video conferencing in the early 2000s, wider adoption in the 2010s, and in part driven by COVID, relatively ubiquitous. And by ubiquitous here, I mean most people in at least developed countries have got access to this. VR and AR lagging behind again, tech precursors in the noughties, early adoption in 2010s, maybe wider adoption 2020s. I'm not going to say ubiquity yet, but certainly wider adoption. And then computational notebooks, I think we're in the early adoption phase of that. We're starting to see more use of computational notebooks, but it's still not widely adopted. So the point of all of that is that there's a long lag time between the early work and it becoming more widely adopted or even ubiquitously adopted. And roughly speaking, it's kind of a 20-year lag. So the things that we are starting to build now are unlikely to be making a difference in researchers' lives for 10 or 20 years. Which is why Andy, and I should explain, I've come into this relatively late. Andy's been breaking the trail on this one, has been thinking for a little while around future activity. So what I might do now is stop my presentation and pass to you, Andy.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. So I mingled up the next two agenda items into one, basically giving you an overview of why we are, what we are looking for and what we have been starting looking for as part of the EOSC project. Sorry, just switching. So basically, the whole motivation for this came out of an initiative that we have within the European Open Science Cloud, which for all non-European participants who might have been spared the flood of information and debate that has been going out on this in the past few years, is one of the visions in Europe to realize a new collaborative environment for researchers, you know, to live in a different world, so to speak. Basically a free network of transparent services that can be used by researchers to drive their field. What became pretty clear in the early days was that building this thing is more than just bringing together the infrastructures that we have and interconnecting them and making them talk to each other. So we have yet a bigger interface, but we are actually moving into a new environment. And the debate that emerged from that was that digitization, the things that we are preaching basically, is changing everybody's lives. And unfortunately also our own lives as researchers, which we sometimes seem to be very stubborn to refuse, that our lives might be as much impacted as anybody else's. And so what we started early on is discussions on how that future might look like. And we had some meetings as part of the EOSC context. I'll present more results on that in a minute. And we also had a BoF session in Helsinki where we started discussing the idea of, you know, shouldn't we stick our heads together and think about what we would like to have 5, 10, 15 years into the future, because we very likely will need to start building that now, given the timelines that Andrew just showed. You know, if we want to have new services, new features available in the future, we need to start thinking about them now. And so this is where this whole idea basically emerged. And for doing this, we need to understand the needs of science. We need to understand the needs of scientists. We need to understand who are those scientists that we're talking about when we talk about performing science. And for the times frames, we initially started off with, let's have grand visions of how things should be 10, 20 years from now. Also having somewhat in mind the time frames that we've just seen on the web, video conferencing, virtual reality, and so on. But another thing that we realized is that in spite of the time it takes to roll out solid infrastructures, we also see that the speed with which new services emerge and the potentially transformative nature that those services exhibit is happening at a much faster scale. So whatever we think might be 10 years into the future might very well find its initial ways, at least into research and research environments within whatever, 5 to 7 years. So what we started off was to arrange a set of meetings where we are not trying to predict the futures, because that's reportedly very hard to do, but to understand actually what we would like our future to be. And I very much like the term, Andrew, I guess you came up with that, of whatever, of these possible or desirable futures. And this kind of sets a very nice mindset, I think, for the debates that we started having. Try to find out what futures lie ahead of us, which ones we would like to come true, and what we would need in order to make them a reality. So what we had funded originally by the EOSC project, and Katarina, who's on the call, Ming Fang, and also Andrew were joining some of these meetings and discussion sessions that we had, was a number of workshops where we pulled together researchers, either domain specific. So we had workshops for example, in the life sciences or with policymakers, interviews, a number of interviews with researchers from a variety of backgrounds. So from Nobel laureates, EOSC grant holders, early postdoc researchers. And one of the most fascinating sequence in that, because I found it the most inspiring one, was with a set of top-level science fiction authors. So researchers who also make a living by writing science fiction, because they turned out to be the most imaginative and the most creative ones in trying to understand what a future could be like. We had numerous interviews with them. Brynne and Bernd invested a lot of time in transcribing those, and we are now in the process of writing those up and preparing that in order to understand what the services could be and what the rules of participation will be that we need in order to have a functioning and productive environment for us to perform our research. So we had, as I said, meetings, interviews, and discussions, lots of different backgrounds, lots of domains, agricultural sciences to social sciences and humanities. There is a number of reports out there that I invite you to read, and there will be more summary reports coming out soon. I don't want to go into the details here. We'll share the slides afterwards. You can click on them. I'm not going to paste them now into the chat, because then everybody starts reading fascinating reports instead of listening to us. But just to give you an idea of the discussions that we had and these are just little snippets of questions that we were touching upon. Obviously the future and the role of artificial intelligence, and giving this certain twists, such as like, if we assume that some form of AI will be joining our research teams, what kind of supervision will our AI team members need so that we can actually entrust them with doing the job without constantly lurking behind their shoulders, whatever their virtual shoulders and embodiments might be, to check what they are doing? How can we check what they are doing, and how can we know we can trust them in the task that we set them off to do? Another question that we embarked on was, what will be the lab of the future, where we move away from our little lab settings where we're sitting in front of a microscope, a desk, studying larger things where we have rooms being equipped with sensors, cars being equipped with sensors, entire buildings being equipped with sensors, and then now we are moving into whatever smart cities. We have been doing studies on people in a lab, moving to observing groups, and now we basically use the whole social media setting already as a lab. So we all basically voluntarily or involuntarily living in our own laboratories. So what will be the boundaries of these? We discussed data. Which data will I be using? Which data would I like to use? Which data am I willing to provide? What are the risks, the limitations? How do I know I can trust the data once we start pulling data, not from a single source that we carefully and manually select and check from, but where we have agents, software tasks, or whatever, pulling together data from a wide range of sources? What kind of mechanisms would we need so that we as researchers would say, yes, this is whatever the 500 sources of data that I'm integrating here, I can trust those, I can trust the aggregate of data as a basis for my own research. Another topic that we discussed was the growing flood of information. So one of the terms that came up in the Mementi wrote now was knowledge. So we are producing knowledge at an ever increasing pace. New papers are being written with a speed that we can't even manage to review them anymore before publishing them, not to mention reading everything that's being published out there, digesting it and turning it into input for our own research. So communicating the insights that we gain, even with now further speeding up with new tools and a larger group of people actually contributing to research generation, knowledge generation. How can we manage this knowledge? How can we pass it on? How can we teach it? How can we consume it? And just as an example, I don't have the slide in here in this deck now, but one of the most revealing stories that I heard at one of our early workshops was when somebody told me that about a year ago, Springer published the first book that was written entirely by a computer. So it's a state-of-the-art report on lithium-ion batteries, an entire book summarizing the state-of-the-art written by an algorithm. And I have no knowledge at all about lithium-ion batteries, apart from knowing how to plug them in when I need to charge them. But somebody told me at that discussion session that being an expert in the field said, well, the book reads quite interesting, but you notice that it's written by an algorithm because, yeah, you notice there is things missing, some sentences don't align very well. So, you know, it's kind of sloppy still, but then he said a sentence that kind of maybe almost panicked. He basically said, you know, it reads like a Google Translate read 5 years ago. And if we take a look at the increasing quality of automatic translation services from a number of providers that have by now reached a level where you can literally, you know, paste in text and really use it almost without any post editing for day-to-day purposes. If we see the same speed up in writing summaries, then at least we know we won't have to write any state-of-the-art reports anymore very soon. But it will also produce a way different way how we can access knowledge. We discussed a lot or raised a lot of questions on collaboration and participation in such infrastructures. Who will be allowed to use them? How can we ensure that everybody can contribute, benefit from it, contribute to it? We had debates about collaboration was, I guess, the most prominent term that came up in the word doodle that we did just at the beginning. We know collaboration is something we're aiming for. At the same time, we see there is competition between colleagues in the same lab, between labs in the same institution, between institutions and countries. So how do we know how collaboration and competition will work out? There is collaboration and competition between academia and industry. So we are living in this very, both very collaborative field, but at the same time, very competitive field. Another question that was very prominent was, of your day-to-day tasks, which are the ones that you would like to get rid of? What services would make your life easier now or in the near future, so that you can focus on the things that you really would like to do? So that's kind of the settings that we discussed. And there is a huge number of services and ideas that popped up. And the following selection is neither the most or whatever top voted for. It's also not necessarily the most exciting ones. It's basically a selection that shows you the range of ideas that were discussed. So something that is almost around the corner or already existing in the early stages, early adoption stages, to some of the more visionary fields. So services for automatic recording of provenance metadata, something where a number of projects exist where we find solutions that still need to mature and where there is still debate on how to best integrate them and improve them. Obviously, anything that helps us with the FAIR principles, making things searchable and findable. How do we get around that? But also, how do we ensure that we find the right things? So making things searchable and findable might lead to the same, you might remember the search engine wars, optimizing for search engines. How do we get unbiased results there? Verifying data quality, verifying processes, guaranteeing the processes are doing what they're claiming to do with data in a world where we download whatever tools from all kind of sources and just run them and deploy them. We had a session on more sensitive data. How can we work with data that cannot be freely shared? So data visiting services rather than data sharing. We had ideas for automated programming. So, you know, you tell your computer what kind of analysis you want to get done, and it jumps off and writes the code for you. Services for semantic integration, ontology mapping. We had a long discussion about translation services. And when we're talking translation, it's not so much between different languages as of whatever German, English, and so on, but also you know, the dream of voice-to-voice translation, obviously, but more on a different level that we aren't addressing so much so far, such as translating between different disciplines, translating the jargon, the metaphors that we're using, between researchers of different fields that need and want to collaborate to solve interdisciplinary problems, translating from research to policymakers, from researchers to media representatives to communicate science. We also had discussions on translating vertically, so between whatever, from expert to student level, from student or expert level to high school level to the public, and vice versa, so that we can communicate scientific concepts across different levels of sophistication, that we can communicate requirements and needs across those different levels. Something came up in the what would you like to get rid of thingy was automating copy editing and filling forms to make reporting easier. We're all suffering from an overload in bureaucracy, it seems sometimes, but it's true, it's getting rid of tedious tasks that are not key to the actual research. We had services for pseudonymization, anonymization, automating data analysis, a lot of discussion about measuring the impact of research, what is really contributions that we have and how can we measure them, trusted services for collaborative things. So trust came up quite frequently, either from the data level to the service level, who owns the data that's being collected via those collaborative tools and so on. And then basically also further random selection, the last slide, just to wrap up a bit. Anything on reproducibility, meta-study, training came up quite frequently. We also had a few services that were not so much AI and computer science services, but human expert infrastructures. So having a service that consists very much as we have human expert infrastructures in libraries or help desks. Why not have human expert services that do statistics for us on the evaluation side of studies, or that do data wrangling and coding, where you pull your data together, then you contact your service desk. Can you, match it up and put it into a form that I can feed it in a processing pipeline? We had quite some debate about rules of participation. How can we ensure that we have a wide variety of services, that we have efficient services that are easy to use, but at the same time that we don't suffer from market dominance or have quasi monopolies? How do we avoid vendor login, with the vendor not necessarily being tied to industry, but to a single specific protocol that obviously then at some times would also become a hindrance? How do we counteract data colonialism, where the ones who have the data obviously have an advantage from it and make sure that they want to stay within their own crowd? And two things, and I guess those are the ones that are particularly relevant for this BoF session, is the last two items on this slide: continuous monitoring and technology risk assessment, which came up from a debate where was with one of our science fiction authors who said, whenever the pharmaceutical industry comes up with a new product, it needs to go through a range of tests. We now hear it every day with those vaccines for COVID that are tested in different stages for the effectiveness and for the potential harm before they're being rolled out to the public. With technology, we take a way easier approach in many cases. We come up with new solutions, we roll them out. Then a couple of years later, we say, oops, rolling something as simple as thumbs up, thumbs down out to a large group has a way different effect than just the thumbs up and thumbs down icons would assume. So the effects we see on social media. So will we need something like a continuous technology risk assessment accompanying the services that we move out in such virtual research environments? And also the need for continuously assessing what we will need in the future, as these needs and requirements obviously are changing as new services become available, and our needs and our imagination changes with what we see being around the corner. So basically, just to sum up, what we realized was that this whole science and virtual research environment thing is something we need to discuss on a global level. This is not just what we are doing within the EOSC. And we need to have a continuous activity that feeds into that pipeline, because building up that infrastructure will take time. And if we don't start thinking now about what we very likely would have liked to have 5 to 10 to 15 years into the future, then we will find an infrastructure that is lagging behind our needs and wishes, basically. And we need to also have this continuous evaluation of the impact of the services and the rules of participation. So that's kind of the summary of what we have learned so far. And what we would like to do now is to see how we can take this further, how we can make sure that these initial ideas that we got from, by our standards, a large number of interactions, but still a very limited set of interaction on a larger scale, and see where we can push this forward and find also the mechanisms to feed it into this pipelines where we test new ideas, test new services, so that they make it into real environments in the near future. Whew. So that was a rush through.
So thank you, Andy.
Andrew,
I'm wondering
I'll hand back to you.
So I'm wondering if there would be value in maybe just allowing 5 minutes for people to ask quick questions, if they've got questions of clarification on that activity that you're doing before we move into the group discussion. Do you think that would be useful?
If there are any questions, I'm very happy trying to answer them.
Okay, does anybody have any questions for Andy on that piece of work?
I do. This is Karen. Andy, you said you were in the process of writing up those interviews and use cases. When can we expect to see those? That's exciting.
So a lot of the stuff is coming out as we speak. So a lot of the interviews have already been published on the EOSC Secretariat website, and we can maybe send out a link to the participants of the material, and we'll obviously also share the slides where some of the reports are already available. At least 3 of them are currently stuck, and I'm the kind of the bottleneck here because we need to go through the last edits before we send them out. Yeah, apologies.
No.
But yeah, they will be coming out in the next few weeks and months. So this is an ongoing activity. And a few of the more exciting ones are really around the corner. Yeah.
Any other questions of clarification for Andy before we move on?
I think there's something in the chat.
From Yuri.
Okay, I have a question, a quick one. Concerning the people who was interviewed, you mentioned they range from a Nobel, from Nobel to students, and I didn't see any tip about delivery to industry. I mean, how virtual research environments can help to accelerate, speed up innovation to industry as well.
That's true from the original setting that we had, because the way this project was set up was that there was different target groups that were assigned to different departments. So our task was researcher engagement. There is a similar task associated to industry engagement. So they were keeping that connection more closely. Although it turns out, and I fully agree with you, that we definitely see the role of industry as a key driver. And we are having some plans of discussing with a few people from that background. And nicely enough, we were in kind of some of the people that we talked to have a dual role anyway, so are on the boundary side. But yeah, we started off with a focus on research settings. So that's true. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other quick questions before we move on? Okay, so Andy and I spent some time thinking about the best way to do this next session because we had no way of knowing how many people we would get. And so we have 23, which for me is just on the cusp between trying to do something as a group and trying to do something in breakouts. We have some questions, and I might jump to the questions so that you can see them. Sorry, just bear with me. So these were the questions that we thought might be useful to, can you identify some, concrete working group outputs in the VRE space? Sorry, VRE, Virtual Laboratories, Science Gateways. Are there more future-facing tasks that could be done that people want to work on? And are there other activities that would help us determine future VRE needs? So I guess the question is, do we want to try and do this in a group as a whole now? We've got 45 minutes before the session ends, or do we want to split into breakouts? Or is even negotiating that going to be too difficult?
I think
you broke it.
Okay, Sandra?
I totally agree. We are probably exactly on the border between this. That was also the number we anticipated for tomorrow. I would feel these 3 questions are really good to discuss in the whole group, because I would like to hear the different opinions from everyone here. But if people feel more like that they would speak out faster in let's say 2 groups, please, let's break up.
Hey, Andy, I mean, this was originally your session before I gate crashed it. What do you want to do?
I guess we can stay in the big group.
I love that.
Doable.
Okay. All right, let's give it a go.
The majority vote in the chat at the moment.
Oh, okay, thank you. I can't see.
Feel cozy and comfortable with us, it seems. So.
Oh well, good. That's good. I should actually pop the chat window up. All right, let's stay. Yeah, no, there's clear consensus to stay as a big group. Excellent. The technology is working. Okay, so if that's the case, can I suggest that we might try for roughly 10 to 15 minutes each? If we stay on 10 minutes each, that'll give us a little bit of time to summarize the next steps. So, so let's see where we go with 10 minutes. Now, I haven't been looking at the collaborative notes document, so I can't tell whether people have been putting stuff in. I'm wondering, Andy, I know it's now coming up to 1:45 in the morning for you, but you're young. What do you think about you facilitating the discussion and me trying to capture it? Or would you rather do it the other way around?
Fine both ways. I'm just opening the link to the collaborative document. Give me a sec. Where no, you have the document open, so I assume.
Yeah, probably. I'm trying to fight my way out of. Okay. Oh, I should say, by the way, if you have not yet done so, please go into the notes document and put your name and contact details at the top.
I got the document open, so we can get started.
Yeah. So, but yes, please put your details in so we know who turned up.
So the question really is, I think, along 2 lines. I mean, one of the ideas of such BoF sessions was to start potentially 1 or more working groups that pick up the topics that we've been discussing. And so what we were wondering is, what would be the most burning question? So first of all, is this of interest to anybody? And if we got a clear no on this one, now we can go and have another round of coffee. But assuming that this is of interest to a larger group of people and you deem it worth discussing this in further iterations, the question is, what could we produce that would be helpful for the creation, for feeding the pipeline into future research environments? Any opinions? I'm now scrolling down the chat window to have that in parallel.
So should we just raise a hand, or because you raised the hand, I'm happy to raise a hand before I start to talk.
Just start, because I don't see all the participants in one screen. So okay. Need to check whether this pops up and is resorted. So
if you go into the participant view, just as a hint,
Yuri has the hand raised.
Yuri has a hand raised.
Yeah.
And Sorry, Yuri, I just, unmuted myself and then I've seen your hand. So maybe I just start to talk. So I love this idea of looking at, let's say, the next 20 years with the virtual research environment interest group. We also like to look at the vision, but also to have some very concrete steps and to have, something like at the moment we looked at frameworks, interoperability, patterns where we can work internationally together, that all the different developments can talk to each other in a way, for example, with RESTful APIs. So really going a little bit into the nitty-gritty details, but also with a bigger view. So a mixture of both. But it would be really helpful, I think, with a bigger group to have these ideas. Where do we want to be in 20 years? And then to break it down in these smaller packages of working groups, because it's very well defined in RDA. So working groups have this goal of we have something created in a year. Mm-hmm. Great. The interest group at the moment, how we envision it, and Kieran, say if I'm wrong there, but I think we envision it really that it stays always working together with the community on creating working groups, a little bit as an umbrella, and helping to kick the working groups off, but staying as an interest group and being able to be around in the RDA rules. And that would be for the moment for me.
Mm-hmm. Fine, thanks. Yuri?
I rose hand because actually looking at the acronym of this session, I expected virtual, but this is vision for future. So this a positive surprise for me. Recently, we published a paper that has a name like Future Scientific Data Infrastructure, mm-hmm. where we made exactly the steps that I put in the chat, that we reviewed something what happens in research infrastructure in Europe, surely, because I don't know much about other regions, for the last like 20 years. Then we did this in a couple of stages and periods. It became clear what would we expect. So we did this, started with this kind of research. I think it started this from last EOSC symposium last year, not this year, last year. This was face-to-face, so it was capable to generate a number of ideas and thoughts, not like this year virtual meeting. So you cannot do this brainstorming. So we made this research, and clearly was what we defined as an EOSC 1 was really published like EOSC minimum viable whatever product. Yeah. Minimum viable EOSC. But next, then I even tried to contact a EOSC architecture group, showing this. If you define this EOSC as EOSC 1, this is a vision what can be EOSC 2. And what our approach was not like we are generating idea from our hand or whatever, our imagination. We look at the technology development. So in this paper, we analyze the background technology trends, including artificial intelligence, what is going in the security infrastructure area, computation, and so on. And if you put this into a timeline, you clearly see, you just see what will be next direction, what will be next development. So that's why I think that one of the first, I would say, step is to create this timeline of whatever we want to see. Research environment, timeline for research environment. Artificial intelligence or automation of scientific research, yes, let's do this timeline. And this is what my understanding. I would be happy to contribute to this. So I'm working in, say, infrastructure research for more than 20 years. So for me, it's what quite easy and naturally understand what happens for the last 20 years and what happens in the next couple of years.
This sounds excellent. And I just noticed from the chat that somebody seems to already have located the paper. So we have a link to that in the notes. You
Yes,
can check whether we got the right one. That's the one that you were talking about.
Yes, it's it.
See?
Oh yeah, I will just
Research is working
version number
well in the background.
Okay, so this is what search works.
That's great. Michelle, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I was wondering to what extent it could be within the scope of this group to talk about how VREs become fair. So I ask this question because I'm involved in some of the other RDA working groups and other programs which are looking at how to apply fair to research software. I'll just put in the chat some of the links to the BoF we've got coming up. So as we're working towards community agreed principles of how to apply the FAIR principles to research software, but a question then arises, how does that affect FAIR software infrastructure? If we consider that in applying FAIR to data, we now have lots of specifications on what a FAIR data repository would look like, leading to certification. And this ties in with some of what Yuri was saying about EOSC and their architecture requirements. Should we, as a community, be starting to think more about what FAIR research software infrastructure, and particularly for VREs, might look like? So I just wondered if that was an option too.
Definitely one of the topics that are on the agenda, because yeah, if the infrastructure and the software is not fair, then it's likely to be of very limited use to just a very small number of people that happen to know where the services are and how to use them. So I guess this is one of the key goals in general, to make these much more easily accessible and also reusable along the FAIR principles. Any further?
And I want also,
yeah,
second time, can I still not put my hands down. This is also, I would like to comment about all this movement about FAIR data, FAIR infrastructure, FAIR whatever. The issue here that in most cases, I don't want to criticize people. People just don't look on FAIR principle deeply from the technological point of view. Because if this is something what is done quite good in research, not research, analysis at the Go FAIR initiative. They described what metadata requirement for FAIR principles. If you go from these metadata requirements to infrastructure requirement to make FAIR principle, FAIR metadata, you actually will link to actually all current big data and data science technologies. Because you need PID infrastructure, you need data search, you need data quality, you need storage, and so on. All this FAIR is much deeper technologically than people, but from my observation, are talking just FAIR is FAIR. No, this is much deeper than we can imagine.
FAIR really unveils its complexity once we take a closer look at what is under the hood, if we really want to make something fair. I agree, and the complexities are mind-boggling, and we take one step after the other. I see Andrew beginning with a raised hand, in natural hand, not a blue one.
An actual wetware hand, yes. So just a quick comment on that. So my organization is running a platforms program. Kerry Levitt, one of my colleagues, is also in this call. She's responsible for that program. We are in the middle of thinking through in Australia what FAIR might mean for platforms, noting that there are two dimensions. There's the question of, does the VRE enable fair data, or at the very least not make the data less fair as part of processing it? So that's one element. And the other element, which is I think what Karina has been talking about in the chat, is, yeah, but what about the platforms themselves? How do we think about making the platforms themselves, the VREs or their components, more reusable, more interoperable? So if you like, it's more of a research infrastructure focus. And so we're trying to tease out what both of those things might mean. And once we have some results, we'd be happy to share them.
Cool. I have Sandra.
Yeah, thank you. So we have a project, the preservation quality tool, and we are looking also into the FAIR testing, exactly what Andrew was talking about. So one thing is to test, is a data fair that is in a Science Gateway or VRE, and one is how to test whether the VRE or the Science Gateway itself. And we have implemented the first indicate. It's the fair maturity indicator test that was developed via an RDA working group. And we give suggestions how to make data more fair. And the next step is really looking at VRE. So if someone is interested, we are happy to share that. It should be implemented in the next 8 weeks. And yeah, looking into the different possibilities and happy for feedback, because at the moment, to really suggest something, how to make data more fair, it's tougher than it sounds like. It's not always just testing for a DOE or unique identifier or is it a URL. It goes much further. So yeah, happy to discuss these things.
Yeah. So lots of discussions around solving those fair challenges that we are meeting. Absolutely. Juliana? You need to unmute yourself.
There. I knew I forgot something. Excuse me. I'm Julian Schneider. I am a data liaison for Sage Bionetworks. And so I help our consortia transfer their data or contribute their data to the Sage website. So I've been, or repository. So I've been seeing some really interesting things, even in the few months I've been there, one of which is how our virtual science things still can't keep up with the science. I'm looking, we've got templates for assays, and we're already behind because there's new assays coming out all the time. We've got multi-seq coming on. We deal with I deal with mostly Alzheimer's disease and psychiatric disorder consortia, and cell hashing, and we're scrambling to get the right metadata from people. So trying to figure out how we can get these virtual environments to keep up with the speed of how people are doing things. And the other thing that I just want more than anything else is to not enter the same thing 14 times. We're still doing that. How are we still doing that? It's kind of nuts. But anyway, those are just my two random thoughts because it's a little late for me.
Andy, if we're going to have time at the end to try and identify particular tasks that we might spin up. So I've just noticed Karen's put her hand up. Maybe if we could do Karen and then move on to one of the other questions.
Yeah, we have Fang first, has her hand up. And then.
Yeah, so my question with the FAIR, it seems to me is pushed out by the at the current by infrastructure providers, and how researchers will see FAIR from the other side. Research come to the virtual research environment. Should they care, or or they don't need to care about the nitty-gritty details? What's the line? What's the responsibility of the infrastructure providers? What's the responsibility of researchers in regards to FAIR? Otherwise, we just talk FAIR among ourselves.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I like the term responsibility because it takes a different perspective on this whole fairness discussion, or in general about this whole evolution of research infrastructures and environments. I fully agree. So I have a last hand up from Kieran, and then we might want to move into discussing potential subtopics and outputs actually that we could produce as such a working group. So Kieran?
Kieran or Karen?
Karen, sorry.
I think
Sorry,
Karen had her hand up before me. Yeah.
Well, I don't know.
Yeah, sorry. That was the chat hand and the other one was the blue hand I saw. Sorry, my apologies.
That's okay. Kieran, were you ahead of me? That's fine.
Look, okay, you had your hand up, Karen, before, so you might as well go because we might need to move on to the next topic.
Well, okay. So I do feel like a lot of the work that I hear you guys talk about is, very visionary, which is great. But even from a more sort of pragmatic point of view, maybe somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but my sense with the VREs as they are now, at least some of them, there is an option to connect to known data feeds and APIs, but am I wrong in thinking that VREs do a pretty good job now integrating, software and compute resources, but there's no discovery layer, so that if you're a researcher, if you're working in a VRE and you want to go discover data, go look for data, you can't, you can't do that within the environment. So again, this is very pedestrian in the sense that have the VREs been built out so that we at least have access to data, software, and compute in one interface?
Findability is definitely still one of the challenges that seems so trivial, at the same time so hard to fulfill. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I would say, Karen, it depends on the VRE. So one of the ones in Australia that's very widely used in the ecology space is EcoCommons, and that includes a data discovery service. So it's CSIRO built the knowledge network, and it connects to a whole of something like 900 different data sources in that space, and they're adapting that for other disciplines. So they're starting to look at data discovery. And then we're also looking at the discoverability of the VREs themselves. So how do the researchers know which ones to go for? So that's something else that I'm currently looking into.
Thanks.
Kieran, no.
Sure. Look, I wanted to throw in a quick thought into the mix here. I think it's useful to think of this as a pipeline. You're going to have new emerging ones, and they're going to be more mature ones. If you ask me about what the step change needs to be, to me today, a lot of the virtual environments that we're building are really custom built ones. But maybe what we need to think about is how do we make it like Amazon? How do we make it, commoditize it, where you have all the components in there that people can come in and very quickly build whatever they want on top of that. And then others can build services and provide that as a next layer up. I just wanted to throw that thought into the mix here as we're thinking about this.
I like this a lot because it's taking us one step further beyond the activities that are currently being addressed in a number of working groups and projects and initiatives already anyway. So there is a lot of activity in, as we've just had put in discussion, on making infrastructure findable, making tools findable. We are not there yet in many cases, but we know how to progress there and what the next steps would be. The idea that you just highlighted is basically the one but next step, and I think it's these are the steps that we should start thinking about, so that we have a clear set of questions to ask 2 years from now when we start the next working groups that solve the next problem at hand. So this will kind of be a meta question, identifying the upcoming research or coordination challenges that we will have where we would need then to launch working groups at the REA plenary 25 or 26, wherever that will be, and in whichever environment, to actually solve the problem. So having this one really as an initiative to come up with the key questions kind of to precede the discussion phase, that level. And the question is, what kind of outputs could we produce if we take this kind of visionary approach? What kind of outputs could we produce that would be deemed useful, even if it's not entirely useful next year, but useful 5 years from now, where people would say, hey, cool that those group of people sat back and thought about this at that stage to prepare the next, the next phases, so to speak. I've lost track of the order. Mingfang, you had your hand up, and then Kieran, then Sandra again. Or is this the hand still up from the last one?
Sorry, it was still from last one. Take it down.
Sandra.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think really output, and that I'm a fan of having, I like the big visions, but I also like to have something because people need success stories also. So to see that the landscape evolves, that you know we have the next steps that we can work on in the next 1 year, in the next 2 years. So I think one of the big goals could be really like the interoperability aspect of FAIR, because that is something we have mature virtual research environments, science gateways, and if they could already talk to each other, because let's say have some examples like Taverna, Galaxy, the VFRE. I mess up the name of the European one at the moment, and I know that there was this big paper about the different virtual labs in Australia. So if we could really show, oh, the strengths of the different frameworks, we can combine that they can talk to each other for different services, that would bring us a large step further. It's similar like how Kieran said that, and how we look at, you know, the next steps maybe for working groups. It could be something really nice to say, yes, let's look at a framework that the different mature science gateways can work with each other.
The question is whether if ever anything emerges from this BoF session as a working group, whether this should be going in the direction of actually solving a problem. So picking a problem and solving it, like the one that you just mentioned in terms of interoperability. So launching that as initiatives, and we could launch 4 or 5 of these. So that would be one option. What I would love to keep going on beyond that is really this visionary thinking of what would be new ideas to address in the future. So where we wouldn't launch a solve it working group right away, but where we have an initiative that actually identifies potential topics that would be moving into such a solving group 2 years from now, 3 years from now, basically. So keeping those two things apart, and I think both are useful. So I like the idea of identifying 3, 4 topics that could immediately feed into a working group, such as interoperability between VREs. I think that's a highly relevant and very helpful idea. Same as for findability of research infrastructures and services that we had discussed just before. Question is whether the other half of looking forward would be considered useful as well. Kieran, you had raised your hand. And you need to unmute. We see you talking, but
Sorry, I thought I hit the button. Yes, I was echoing very much what you were saying, that there's a need, that the interoperability piece, and those ones are really good to have right now. But I think there's a really good value in keeping the focus on that visionary point. Adding to that, I think what's probably a way of thinking about it is sort of mapping some of the things of where things are at right now, might be for step 1. Looking at where the visionary questions are we want to ask, and then maybe looking around identifying sort of the things that are emerging out there we can see that might get us there, just like the example that Andrew put, the mother of all demos. Just picking those things that today are too out there or too small, but they might just, you could sort of draw the dotted lines that lead to answering some of those questions. So I think if you had a working group that looked at what are those key questions in the future, and then some emerging examples or really novel ideas that experiments people are doing that might just lead to realizing those ones, I think that might be a useful exercise.
So I still need to take a look at the report that Yuri mentioned, and using such a report as a baseline. But do we think that such a report, as you just said, such a list of potential services, ideas, needs, and a timeline with it, would be considered a useful and a valid output for both the interest group, but as well as for further working groups out there?
So Andy, I'm a co-host, which means I can't raise my hand electronically. I'm sorry.
Oh.
So wearing a technical advisory board hat, which I think I get to do for another 10 days, I think the more future-facing, here's our view of the landscape work, I think would sit well within an interest group, and you could maybe produce what IDA calls a supporting output that, if you like, describes the landscape. And so that could be a piece of work that happens within an interest group. Mingfang Wu, who's spoken already in her interest group, has already produced a number of those kinds of supporting outputs. So doing that out of the interest group's fine. And then you could have concrete working groups that are tackling particular problems, like the interoperability question that Sandra raised, which seemed to get some interest in chat. I've just posted the 2 remaining questions in chat again as reference for people. And so we have 15 minutes left.
Good. Michelle, you had your hand up?
Yeah, thanks. I was going to say, if you did some visioning about the different pieces you wanted to do over a few years, that would work really well with the work that we're doing to create a FAIR for Research software roadmap, which we have a BoF on tomorrow. So basically we're saying the FAIR for Research software working group, which is a separate RDA group meeting on Thursday, will have created principles of how community agreed principles on how to apply FAIR to research software by middle of the next year. And so the roadmap's then asking, well, what next? If you think about everything that's happened in FAIR data, we have to recreate all of that now. FAIR metrics, FAIR maturity models, FAIR software certification, FAIR curriculums, FAIR career paths for RSEs, research software engineers, etc. Everything that's happened since 2016 for research data and applying FAIR now has to be done for software. And so one of the pieces is around, as I said earlier, a research software infrastructure. So our roadmap piece aims to identify which of those different groupings where work's needed, whether it's curriculum design or interoperability or software infrastructure, to identify who's interested in working in that and bring them together to map out what they'd want to do, and then to pitch that to funders. So if this group was doing something along those lines to identify what are the priorities to create FAIR VREs and which pieces you wanted to do in the next year and also longer term, we would happily include that in our discussions with funders then on who's going to support which bit and make things happen.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly the pipeline I think that we need to keep feeding. That was also the original idea when we started off with this initiative within the EOSC. So I get it from the discussion that we will likely have 2 parallel activities. One is continuing these more visionary oriented ideas generation and services identification discussion as an activity out of an interest group. And then spawning off specific working groups on tackable and manageable problems that actually require a solution, such as whatever, standardizing interfaces, communication protocols, and so on.
Andrea, one idea only, just to throw it out there, brainstorming. Maybe since the interest group meets twice a year, maybe we could have one meeting always dedicated to future visions and looking really more at the 5 to 10 to 20 years, and every second meeting would be like trying to really create the working groups to do something more ad hoc. That could give a balance between both and would both give enough time to prepare maybe something meaningful.
Yeah. I think what we could do is not even trying to snatch an entire one out of those 2 meetings, but actually have this as a sub-activity as part of the interest group, having individual. So what I found was that here we're having a very creative discussion. We can bring in quite a number of ideas from our individual backgrounds, But if we talk to our groups or our constituencies back home, I guess we create a much more inspiring vision from the very respective backgrounds. So from FAIR for infrastructures, from services, from an AI perspective, from findability, from interoperability perspective, what would be ideal visions? What would be perfect scenarios? If we could come up with, for those of us who are interested in driving these visions forward, doing whatever, some small vision session within our own teams, or the labs, the people that we're working with, and then having a meeting where we bring those together, for example, write it up, prepare it as a report, and then present that at the next interest group meeting. And then later on, push it out to a larger audience. I guess that would be a very helpful path forward. So really going into a breadth field to collect input from, larger wisdom of the crowds, basically. Would people be interested, or would some of you be interested in doing this, or in running such an exercise? So we would
Andreas,
coordinate.
I would say it's yes, people are interested, but we are missing face-to-face meetings, sessions, discussion, and brainstorming. It's difficult to generate a new idea if you sit in the front of computer, or even talk to your team via the same Zoom session. Yep. Unfortunately, it's reality, and I feel this low drop in quality of research of the PhD students. And so, okay, so we can try, but this will be a problem.
I fully agree. We noticed the same thing when we started our initiative. The first round of workshops that we still had early this year allowed for very creative discussions. It's way harder to do this in online sessions, yeah. Which again leads to the question, what is missing to make it possible? If we talk about futures, and we talk about VR futures, and we take all the ideas that the industry is pushing out, again, it's a challenge that we need to face. Could we come up with a solution that way?
Maybe only as an idea. And I know a lot of people think probably, oh God, I discuss so often how to make, virtual meetings much more efficient and give it the extra spin of face-to-face meeting. But maybe that is another spin we have to take for the interest group, to say, maybe we need a working group how to solve these problems if we don't meet face-to-face. How to solve virtual research environment without being face-to-face.
Why not talk to sociologists and psychologists to identify what is the difference meeting physically and meeting in screen time, so to speak. I remember there is this chain of restaurants operated by blind people where you sit completely in the dark. I'm not sure if any of you has been to these, but the feeling of having dinner sitting next to somebody who's having dinner next to you and you have no clue who that is, how they look like, and you still feel physical presence. So aura kind of thing is whatever. There is very interesting studies on feeling presence of embodiments in any form. So I guess there is interesting challenges to be solved. Or at least the right questions to be asked, even that is already difficult.
Yes, I'd like to comment that, well, during this session, we, to discuss the future of VRS, several different approaches were talked here. I mean, we discussed about how to make infrastructures fair, or using some company approach like Amazon, or the influence of the technology. And perhaps a suggestion is to have small, short other sessions, but more focused. For instance, okay, let's discuss a technology-driven approach. Okay, how pick a technology, artificial intelligence will influence. Another discussion is, what do we mean by a fair infrastructure? or how to offer a service. I mean, perhaps you could split in different threads and be more focused. Just a suggestion.
Yeah. No, if we could collect the questions, as you just suggested, if we could collect the questions that people would be interested in exploring further in a visionary setting. So what kind of questions you would like to address with your team? If we get that list, if we could put that into the document, then we should get a pretty nice coverage within the next few months of, even if it's not as creative as having all of those as face-to-face meetings, I guess we can create a quite nice overview of ideas, and then using this to seed further discussion should really unleash a little bit of creativity, even in the limited settings that we are currently facing. Kieran, you had your hand up?
Andreas, it's a good idea to collect questions. It's a good idea.
Yeah.
But still, I would still think about how we can collect questions, because if somebody will write or post question, it's generate a question associative or similar or alternative question from other people, how to make this map of linking between questions.
Mm-hmm.
This is what happens in a real communication. But if we are individually post, we are losing linking between different stages, questions, and whatever meaning.
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody can make a structure how to collect questions while preserving the like associative link between questions, it would be very useful.
Mm-hmm. I guess pulling it then all together again so that it creates a landscape rather than a number of dots that are not connectable will be a challenge, but I guess an interesting one and very inspiring one to work with. So I would be very happy to, even if we have 100 isolated questions, putting those on a plate and then shuffling them around to tell a story will be a very, very fascinating activity and task, I think, a very inspiring one. So that's actually a challenge and a problem I'm looking forward to.
This is a cloud of words.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. So Andy, we have 3 minutes. I wonder if I could perhaps just do the final slide and wrap up. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay, so I want that one. Sorry, my mouse cursor has decided to disappear, which is making navigating things an interesting challenge. Okay, so thank you for your engagement in the discussion. I think that was very useful. There's been some very good comments and also some useful interactions in chat. The link there has got the slides now. I will make the Zoom chat when this meeting finishes. I'll take the Zoom chat and I'll place that also in that folder. The Mentimeter results are in the folder as well. And I'll also put a link to the collaborative notes document so that everything for this session is bundled up. I think we have some good paths forward for how we might proceed. Andy and I will have a think about the best way to collaboratively elicit concrete working group ideas, building on Yuri's idea of keeping those associations between ideas and chaining from one idea to the next. I have some thoughts about idea incubation systems that I've seen used in the past that may be helpful there. But I think this has been a very useful session, and thank you for engaging with it in an active way. I'm glad we didn't split into separate breakout groups. I think the discussion was richer by doing it all in one group like that. So thank you from me. Andy, would you like to say some closing words?
I spoke so much during this session already.
And you just want to go to sleep.
No, really, but no, I mean, there's lots of exciting ideas, I guess, that will keep me awake even for some time now. But I really hope we can keep that momentum going. So if we can keep this document, the collaborative notes document alive, and if people who are interested in following some of the questions could still add them even if we are closing the session now. So we have a list of ideas and we can get back to you. I guess that would be a nice starting point for launching further activities.
Yeah, indeed.
I really enjoyed the ideas that were being raised, and also I was following the chat a bit. The discussion, the point came up that there's a lot of material in this, even though it was just a short session to start the brainstorming. So if you can keep that going, that would be absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, and I think it was great. And again, let me encourage people, if you're interested in the VRE topic, to go to the breakout session in Breakout 4, where you'll see Sandra again. And Kieran as well, I imagine.
Yes. I want to thank Sandra and Kieran.
Yeah, so thank you all. My particular compliments to those of you in Europe for whom it's now a terrible time of night. Thank you for staying awake and staying engaged. And thank you for your ideas and input, and stay tuned for what comes next.
Thanks for organizing this and having us.
Thanks, everybody.
Andrew.
Thanks.
Okay,
Bye.
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 Bye.